Hi everyone, Courtney here with Bionic Blaze Clothing. I am a two-time cancer survivor and amputee. Today we're going to talk about chemotherapy and what to expect. Now, everyone has a different experience as everyone's cancer is different. The stage of where your cancer is at is different, where it's located is different. I will only be speaking to chemotherapy. I never experienced any radiation, so I can't really give advice on any of that, but definitely would love to give some insight on some things. I was just thinking about when I was first going through chemotherapy and how lost and lonely I felt in the whole situation, and this was 18 years ago at this point, I think. This is kind of pre-Instagram and really at the very beginning stages of Facebook. So there wasn't really much to, look up or have any sort of community because of that. So I think that this day and age is really great to be able to have some sort of camaraderie and for me to be able to give my experience. Even though I didn't personally have the guidance, I kind of want to be able to give that to all of you. So I personally went through very, very intense chemotherapy. A lot of people will only do outpatient therapy. I did a mix of inpatient and outpatient chemotherapy. So essentially, outpatient means you're there for the day and then you go home. Inpatient means you're going to be staying the night, at least one night at the hospital. So the kind of chemo that people with bone cancer get specifically is very, very intense because you're essentially trying to get the chemo all the way through to the bone, which is obviously really tough. Now, chemotherapy is meant to attack all of your immune system. It does not discriminate. It's going to attack your good and your bad pieces of your immune system. Most of the time when you're going through chemotherapy, you're going to be doing 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off. So essentially 2 weeks of chemotherapy and then 2 weeks to heal. For my specific kind of cancer and the regimen that my doctor decided to do, and again, for those of you who don't know, it's been about 55 years since the original regimen that was decided upon for osteosarcoma was created. It hasn't changed in 55 years. So we're working with pretty old science, and there's just not enough research money to kind of get us through that. But a lot of it has not, they haven't found any better solution than what we figured out 55 years ago. So that's something to think about as well. For the 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, a lot of times they will start with the first week being methotrexate. So the first week was methotrexate. So this is essentially a bright orange chemotherapy that's given to you through the IV. It is extremely toxic. It can actually kill you. So they pump it through your body for 4 hours, and then immediately after that, they will start flushing it out of your body. There is definitely side effects of things that make things very unpleasant. So for one thing, methotrexate specifically will make your pee bright neon orange. It also gave me stomach issues immediately, and later on, a couple of days later, a lot of throwing up and everything like that. So it really changes between people, but that was my own personal experience with methotrexate. Again, this is one of the most toxic ones that you can have. And if there's too much in your body, it can actually kill your liver. So that's why they start flushing it out immediately. And I'm not saying this all to scare anyone or anything like that. It's just more of it's the facts and it is what is the experience of it. Again, it can be super different for everyone. That one specifically is an inpatient most of the time because they do need to monitor your levels of methotrexate that's in your body, and they need to be able to do that regularly, as well as continue to give you fluids through saline IV, as well as drinking a lot of water. The other chemo that I did was cisplatin, and that one actually gave me a bit of hearing loss in one of my ears, and that's one of the side effects of it. I believe that it's one of the ones that also started making my hair fall out. So I was, after probably about 2 or 3 months, my hair started falling out. It didn't happen immediately, and then once that started happening, I just shaved it all off because I felt like it felt weirder to have just like chunks of hair here and there as opposed to just shaving it off. So that was super challenging for me. I felt like that was the sign that I was like officially sick. So that was really, really challenging. So that was probably around 3 months of that, and then I had my bone replacement surgery. Specifically for bone cancer, the only way to get rid of it is to remove the bone. So I had essentially an intense version of a knee replacement. So they removed and replaced between the middle of my thigh to the middle of my shin, and they essentially took the titanium steel and then drilled it into my existing bone on both the thigh and the shin bone sections. For the knee part, there was an actual titanium knee joint that was made, and the only thing that they kept on me was the kneecap. They kept all the tendons and screwed the tendons actually into the metal to keep it in place so it wouldn't be floating around too much. So that was a piece of it, obviously, in order to get rid of the cancer completely. The first 3 months of chemotherapy were to try and shrink it. It did shrink it a bit, but did not shrink it enough to continue on. It made more sense to remove the cancer completely, and that involved a complete bone replacement, essentially. After probably about 2 or 3 months of healing, we went back into doing more chemotherapy. Again, we started with methotrexate, go through cisplatin, doxorubicin. I think there was a couple others, but it's hard to remember all the things. But at some point, my red blood cell count was so low that I had to start getting transfusions a lot, it makes you blood transfusions. It makes you feel pretty good once you get them done, but before then, you can feel like total crap. So it's definitely something that they kind of base off of your blood test results, looking at your CBC. I think it's a complete blood cell count, is what that stands for. And so that will look at your red blood cells, your white blood cells, your platelets, and a myriad of other things to kind of ensure that you're still somewhat healthy. It also will look at your liver function and all of that stuff. So the red blood cell count is kind of the main thing that you have to look for, especially during your 2 weeks off. So like I said, you have 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So typically at the beginning of the second break week, they will have you go in and get a blood test in order to see where your red blood cell count is at. Now, if your red blood cell count isn't high enough in order to do chemo, then you have to push your chemo out another week, which seems fine, right? But then that also means that you will be doing chemo for longer, which was a total mind F to me, because I just wanted to get it all done. And I couldn't because my body wasn't responding in a way, it wasn't healing enough. It wasn't healing fast enough. So the more that your red blood cell count is off, the longer that the chemotherapy is going to take. And specifically with my kind of cancer, the chemotherapy is typically about a year and a half of chemotherapy, which is a really long time. For other types of cancers, it could be about 6 weeks and then you're done. So just imagine having to do an entire year of 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, and just that being your life. It's really, really challenging. I think that one of the biggest things that I just tried to do was, drink lots of water and different factors and have different ways to kind of cope with everything. And I will speak to what to bring during a chemotherapy treatment in a different video. And just trying to keep myself sane in whatever way made the most sense. A lot of TV and movie watching and things like that to keep your mind off of things is like one of the main things that I liked to do. But again, I'll talk about that in a different video. For the rest of the chemo treatments, it started to get to a point where I was constantly losing red blood cells, and so constantly getting transfusions, platelet transfusions as well. Platelet transfusions are essentially, when you receive it, it looks like a big bag of orange juice because it's all only platelets. They've taken out all the aspects of the red blood cells and just left the platelets in there. So red blood cells and platelets usually make you feel really good after the fact. And because you're finally energized and your body has enough oxygen and blood to like kind of make everything go through your body more smoothly. And a lot of times that would help speed up the process of continuing on with the next chemo treatment. But as you can probably imagine, that's pretty challenging. It's just a lot to have to like mentally think about. Another thing that I had to start getting towards the end of my chemo treatment was white blood cell shots, and those are the absolute worst. Essentially, because chemo is killing everything in your body, it can kill your white blood cells as well. So I would have to get a white blood cell shot. Typically, they do it in your arm. Sometimes they'll do it in your stomach. It really just depends on how much meat you have where. I think I was pretty skinny at the time, so I recall them having to do it in my stomach a lot. And those shots are the worst. They make your bones ache. It's really, really uncomfortable, and I always dreaded having to get the white blood cell shots. They were really, really unpleasant. Towards the end, I did decide to end the treatment early. It was not advised by my doctors, and who knows what would have happened if I would have continued on. I believe I finished like 2 or 3 months early. I don't totally recall. And for the reasoning behind that was because I felt like the chemo was doing more harm than good at that point. I had gone through a complete emergency situation where I was losing entirely too much blood during my period. And I ended up having to have 14 units of blood transfused back into my body. And I believe that your body only holds 16. So it is definitely a life-threatening situation at that point. So probably a couple months after that, I decided that I was done. I didn't want to put my body through more trauma, and I felt like it was hurting more than it was helping at that point. So I did decide to quit early, against my doctor's advice. I don't necessarily regret it or anything. My cancer did return 3 years later, but who's to say? I had finished the treatment and it still returned later. There's no way of telling if those 3 months would have been what had decided if I was going to be good or not. And I don't really try and dwell on that either. So I finished chemo early. When you're done, you typically have lots of checkups for quite a while, and then I believe after 2 or 3 years, the checkups get slower and slower. So a lot of times they'll always do a chest X-ray to make sure there's nothing that shows up in there, and they'll always do blood tests. So even though it's been 15 years at this point since I've had cancer, I still get regular blood tests. I don't do the chest X-rays anymore, but I do the blood test just to ensure that there's not anything alarming that pops up. So I went 3 years cancer-free, which is a long time. 5 years usually means you're in the clear. And then I found that my head cancer had returned, and at this point it had returned in my my tendon in my shin. And at that point, once bone cancer is out of your bone, it will spread very, very quickly. So what my decision was either lose your leg or lose your life. And I believe going through everything to try and salvage my limb would have been more painful than just getting rid of the cancer all completely. So I, at that point, with the knowledge of the prosthetics being so advanced, that I decided to have the amputation. It was a super, super hard decision. It was a really hard day, but I think that it was the best decision looking back in hindsight, because I don't think that trying to save my leg would have helped the situation at all. It probably would have made things harder, and who's to say if I would have made it through. I do see people on the Sarcoma group every day where there's someone that's passed, and it's it's a good reminder that we don't know what our outcomes are going to be. So definitely something to think about for that. So after I had the amputation, I did go through more chemotherapy. I don't think they made me do methotrexate again. I don't totally remember, but we definitely did more cisplatin, doxorubicin, and a couple of other different ones that I don't quite recall. And I did that for 4 or 5 months, and then at that point, since the cancer had been eradicated because of the amputation, we stopped doing chemo after that. Yeah, there's a lot, you can possibly lose your hair. There's a lot of different factors that come into how your body's going to react to things. I did have a port both times, 2 different kinds of ports. I can speak to that in a different video, but they were definitely helpful with not having to get stuck all the time, and all of those things that kind of go along with doing long-term chemotherapy, and also like helping with getting the chemo in faster and more efficiently. There's a lot of different ways that people react. Definitely a lot of puking. There's a lot of instances of mouth sores and sores in your bowels. There's sores in your rectum. It's not like a pretty thing to talk about, but there's a lot of different factors that can happen there. I lost my hair both times, and there's a lot of processing and trying to compartmentalize in the moment. Just mentally, you can prepare all you want for the physical part of it, but the mental part is something that's definitely a challenge and something to prepare for. I don't feel like I was very prepared, and I didn't really have any resources, like I said, to be able to mentally prepare for it. So it was definitely a tough journey, but made it through. If there's anything that you all want me to address, or if there's any questions, you can comment below. I'm more than happy and willing to be a help to anyone that's going through this journey now. Now that I'm on the other side, it's been 15 years cancer-free, so I'm very excited about that milestone. And I hope to see all of my fellow cancer warriors in the future. Thank you.